Good morning, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started with our broadcast today. We want to say thank you for joining us for our joint IBM and Komprise webinar, 2 Steps to Cut Your NAS Costs. Our speakers today are Lyndon Smith, Senior Cloud Architect at IBM, and Krishna Subramanian, Co-founder and Chief Operating Officer at Komprise. So why don't we just go ahead and get started, and I will now turn it over to Lyndon Smith, our IBM speaker.
Thank you, Monica, and I want to thank you, Krishna. The first thing I want to talk about is the 2-step process for cutting NAS cost. As I said this is for cutting NAS costs. I didn't say we're replacing the NAS. Very simple 2-step process. The first step, we're going to start by taking Komprise and pointing it at any flavor of your NAS device. Within Komprise is going to analyze your file systems, and based upon its analysis, it's going to determine the where your data sits, how your data is growing, different parameters as far as what we want to set on policies, and based on that policies, how we're going to move that data over to IBM Cloud Storage, which brings up step number 2. Step number 2 is very simple. We're going to take the policies that you created on step number 1 based on identifying your inactive data and cold data, and we're going to move that over to Cloud Object Storage, where it's going to be highly protected and available. So the next slide, we're going to talk about how IBM and Komprise address these challenges. Now, we'll tell you, as I go out and visit clients amongst different areas of the United States, these are the top 4 challenges that I see clients have. Number 1 is the massive data growth. 60 to 90% of my clients see that they're going to be getting a 60-90% data growth in the next 2 years. That data growth also comes with challenges with flat budgets. They say, Lyndon, we're growing at a massive rate. We're looking at over 90% in the next 2 years. But Lyndon, how do I manage that data? How do I protect that data? And then also their flat budget. Flat budget. They don't have any money. They're constrained. One of the other questions I always get from customers is, Lyndon, I can always buy cheaper disks. I'm in my NAS environment. I can buy cheaper disks. But that's not just about cheaper disks. There's a lot of soft costs involved in that. And we'll go into that in a couple more slides about the soft cost. The other one is about storage innovation. Customers see that they are protecting their tier 1 NAS device is saving a lot of their cold inactive data, and so they're asking IBM and Komprise, how can we innovate storage to where I still need this data milliseconds away? So that's why I keep it on my NAS, my tier 1 storage. And then lastly, one of the biggest things that come up is, if I do move this over, this needs to be non-disruptive to the user. So I need to be able to put links in place so that when it's moved over using Komprise to IBM Cloud Storage, it's very easy for that user to get their data back, so non-disruptively. We're going to talk about this more in the next one. So here's the problem. Decades ago, you look at how we started protecting a traditional NAS device. And today, we're still using that older technology. RAID for your local protection, snapshots, backups, and then to protect the entire system, we're using a DR to DR that over. So if I have a 1 terabyte file on a traditional system, that 1 terabyte file is going to cost me upwards of 3-4 extra terabytes in that 1 terabyte file. With IBM Cloud Storage using Komprise, that 1 terabyte file now is going to be maybe 1.7, 1.8, just a small amount of overhead. The reason it's like that with this problem is because we're now removing that inactive data that you're protecting using RAID snapshots, DR, backups. You're copying that data 3 or 4 times, 3 or 4x. So this is the problem that IBM and Komprise are going to solve. So next slide. So on the next slide here, here's where it really comes down to. Here's where Komprise really starts helping with the data movement. I see a lot of customers in their environment today, especially with their budget constraints, that they're using multiple NAS vendors. It's a heterogeneous environment. And so they're wanting the capability to be able to move their data from one vendor to another device. And you know what? They also want to archive that. And so by archiving that, they can put it on cloud object storage. They want the system to be able to scale. Their systems may be at terabyte capacity now, but in the future, they may be upwards of multiple petabytes. So this is where the management interface, and we look at that. Today, there's just not a solution out there that's going to move heterogeneously around different devices within your environment. And this is why IBM has partnered with Komprise. Next slide. So here's the solution. At the end of the day, we're going to protect your data, and we're going to use Komprise to identify it. And so Komprise is going to come in, and it's going to be pointed at your NAS device, whatever you're using today, multiple NAS devices. It's going to identify where that data is sitting. How old is that data? How's it being used? In most companies that I see today, they have a massive data sprawl. Is it mobile data? Is it web data? A lot of different data sprawl out there, and they don't know how to control that. So we're going to use Komprise to really analyze that data. A lot of analytics within Komprise. And once we analyze that data, based upon the customer, we're going to create a policy. You plug in, the customer plugs in all the parameters of that policy, and then it points that policy to IBM Cloud Object Storage to pull that inactive data. For example, you may be looking at, hey, I want to see all my inactive data for the last year. And I want to pull that out of my Tier 1 storage, so it frees up additional costs. It allows you to pull that data off your Tier 1 storage and really start using that Tier 1 storage for what you meant it to be. Was that Tier 1 application data that you need to run your applications. That inactive data is just sitting there. It's just taking up your expensive costs. So that's the solution with using IBM Cloud Object Storage with Komprise. Next slide. Now I'm going to hand it over to Kanursha to talk about the Komprise architecture.
Great. Thank you so much, Lyndon, and thank you all for joining us on this webinar. As Lyndon mentioned, we're very excited to partner with IBM Cloud Object Storage to help you cut your NAS costs. And Lyndon gave you a quick kind of overview of the business benefits. What we want to do now is dive a little bit deeper into the architecture itself and show you how Komprise works with IBM Costs. One other thing I want to mention is this webinar is designed to be interactive. It's a live webinar. So as we go along, if you have questions, please feel free to enter your questions in the questions window in your webinar pane, and we will be monitoring those and we'll answer the questions at the end. So when you deploy Komprise and IBM in your environment, here's what happens. All you have to do is bring up a Komprise virtual machine in your enterprise. So the Komprise virtual machine, it's just a lightweight piece of software. It's running in any hypervisor that you have in your environment. You bring up Komprise, we call it the Komprise Observer, and once you bring it up, you can start pointing it at your storage. So I'm actually going to show you how that works in a demo. So here, once you've downloaded the Komprise Observer and you bring it up in your environment, you will get taken to a page that looks exactly like the one I'm showing here. You go in here and you can now start configuring Komprise to look at all your NAS data. To configure it, you literally just point Komprise at your storage. So Komprise does not use any software agents on your storage, and it doesn't change anything in your storage environment. It looks like a client to your current storage. So maybe you have a mix of NAS in your environment. You might have some EMC Isilon, some NetApps. Maybe you have some NetApp cluster mode filers. It could be NetApp 8 or NetApp 9. You might have some NetApp 7 mode filers, some Windows servers, etc. It could be any NAS environment. So any environment that exposes data via the NFS or SMB CIFS protocol, either of those can be analyzed by Komprise. So you literally just give the IP address of the storage, and then you click on Discover Shares. Komprise shows you all the shares or exports that you have in that file server, and you pick the ones you want Komprise to look at. Once you've done this, and it's literally less than a 15-minute setup, you will start seeing analytics on all your data. And you don't have to wait for days or weeks to see this analysis. As you finish the setup, within 15 minutes, even on petabytes of data, you will start seeing analytics. The first thing Komprise shows you is a distribution of your data by its age or by its age of last access. So essentially it's showing you how much data is cold, how much data has not been accessed, and in how long. So in this example, we can see that we're looking at 195 terabytes of data. We have enabled 5 shares. So across 5 shares across those file servers, there's 195 terabytes of data. And of that 195 terabytes, about 27 terabytes or 3.4 million files haven't been touched in over 3 years. Another about 14% of the data hasn't been touched in over 2 years, and another 27% hasn't been touched in over a year. So if you just add that all up, it's about 55% of the data hasn't been touched in a year plus. And some of the data has been accessed more recently. This is pretty typical of what we see in most environments. Most customer environments, 50 to 70% of the data has not been accessed in over a year. In addition to this, you can also see how fast data is growing in your storage environments. So you can get a sense of how much additional storage capacity you're going to need based on the historical growth rates. So Komprise is showing you all these analytics based on the storage that you pointed it at. Komprise is analyzing the data on it, and that's how it's showing you all of this analysis. So here what it's showing you is the data on the store on these 5 shares is growing at about 42%. And if you did nothing, this 195 terabytes is you're going to need another 277 terabytes of primary data going into this environment. But in addition to all this summary analytics, Komprise also gives you some in-depth file analytics so you can better understand the nature of your data. For example, maybe you have different departments, and for each department you want to show your business users what the profile of their data looks like. So you can actually narrow down all this analysis. You can pick it by specific groups. So we can say, look, I'm only going to look at all the shares maybe in Boston, or I'm going to look at all my shares for the finance department. You can narrow it down like that, and for that subset you could say, look, let me show you what your data looks like. You guys have a lot of video data, a lot of it is old. You can show whether it's big files or small files. Who are the actual users that are the biggest consumers of the storage and active users of it, which groups are accessing it the most, where the data actually sits, etc. So you can do different kinds of analytics on the data. This is now showing 70 terabytes because I reduced it. I only showed a specific group. So I can go back to all shares, and you see all the analysis gets updated. So this analysis can be sliced and diced in different ways as well. But in addition to all this analytics, you notice there's some cost savings that we are projecting here. These cost savings are interactively projected based on a plan that we can edit on the left-hand side. If you remember, Lyndon said, you could set different policies on how you want your data to be managed. And as you set these policies, Komprise actually shows you how much you're going to save. So for example, we can go in and add IBM Cloud Object Storage System and add and say, look, okay, we're going to have an IBM cost on-premise, and maybe there's a bucket in there, and we're going to have data going into that bucket, and here it is, and we can now go in and say, I want to move data to that bucket, and when I move that data, how much am I going to save? So I can put that as my target, and you can not only move data to it, but you can also put a copy of data in there, And as I change my specifications, maybe I want to move data over a year old, as I do this, interactively Komprise projects for me how much you're going to save. So as you change your policies, it will interactively show you how much data will get moved off and what the savings will look like based on that policy. So this is a very interactive environment. You can actually project exactly what the savings will be. And when you're done and you like the plan you've created, you simply activate the plan, and then Komprise actually moves the data based on those policies. So essentially what we showed you in the demo is how you can simply point Komprise at any NAS storage you have. You can get an analysis of how much data you have and how that data is growing and what actually that data contains and who's using it, and interactive ROI projections for your different policies. You can configure policies of when you want to archive data, when you want to replicate data to cost, because maybe you don't want to keep a mirror NAS environment. Maybe even your hot data, you want to put it on cost for the mirror. So you can use Komprise to archive data to cost and to replicate data to cost. And when Komprise moves the data, when you're ready and you're done with all your analysis and you want to actually activate the plan, Komprise not only analyzes data, but it actually moves the data as well and copies data to IBM Costs. And so when it does that, Komprise moves the data without making any changes in your primary storage environment. So when Komprise moves data, the moved data looks like it's still there. So here's a folder before we move data, and here's that same folder after we move data. And we put this red rectangle around the files that we moved just to show you which files are moved. But as you can see, the before and the after look the same. So these files, once we move data, let's say you said move anything over a year old to IBM Costs, then Komprise would find that data, it would move it to IBM Costs, it would keep that data as an object in IBM Costs, but then the data would look like it's still a file on your primary file system. So maybe you're using a NetApp filer, so the data would look like it's still a file on NetApp or on Isilon. And what Komprise is actually doing here is it's replacing the file on the source with a link. And the symbolic link is something that is standard in the file protocol. So Komprise does not need to use stub files. And some of you might have used other products in the past and know that stub files have issues. Stubs can get corrupted or orphaned. But the way Komprise does it, you don't have those problems because Komprise is using standard file protocols. It's using the notion of a link that the file protocols understand, so the Isilon and the NetApp know what to do with that file when they see it. They follow the link, and the link is dynamically bound to that object that's on IBM Costs. And all of this is happening behind the scenes. So the user or the application doesn't see anything different. So it's completely transparent to them. They just see that they have files. Some of them are sitting on the primary NAS, and some of these files are in IBM Costs, but the user doesn't actually see any difference. They open a file, and when they go to open a file, then transparently the file is returned from the object in IBM Costs. So hopefully that gave you a quick high-level overview of how you would analyze data and how you would move data transparently. And now I want to actually hand it back to Lyndon to walk you through how IBM Costs gives you a much lower cost to store data, but a very powerful environment that actually keeps your data durable and reliable and provides you an extensible framework for that data.
Thank you, Krishna. As you can see, based upon her demo, this is a very intuitive, easy to use GUI. We've done multiple installs with Komprise, and it's just 100% easy to use and easy to install. So thank you, Krishna, again. What I want to do here, what you're seeing is the what is object storage. As I visit different clients, one of the things that I get the most of is not really understanding object storage. So I want to use this slide to really get on the same page with everyone of object storage. But by definition, object storage is just an architecture that manages objects. I hope everybody got that one. So, but I'm going to explain it in my terms. So I'm going to use an analogy, comparing object storage to a NAS environment. And in this analogy, we're going to be going to a mall. And in this mall, if I'm using my NAS device and I go to the mall, I'm going to have to drive around looking for a place to park. I'm going to have to remember where that spot is. So if I go up to floor 3 and I have to say, okay, I'm in section B, and remember where my spot is, so when I come back, I can get to my car. Very similar to a NAS environment where you have files and folders. It's a hierarchy infrastructure where you have files and folders, and you have to really kind of know where your data lies. A little different with object storage. Object storage is that portion where instead of having to find your parking spot, you pull up and a gentleman comes out and you're going to valet your car. He gives you a ticket. You go do your shopping, you come back, you hand the gentleman back your ticket, and then he goes and brings your car back. Very similar to object storage. It's really flat. You don't really know where your data is sitting. You just know what's out there being protected. And by handing that object, that ticket, that's the same way as what we call an object identifier. It identifies where that object is and where it lays. So I just wanted to run that analogy and kind of really level set everyone that may not really quite understand what object storage is. So on the next slide, we're going to talk about IBM Cloud Storage. We're going to talk about, on the next slide, please. So what's so great about IBM Cloud Storage? This is what this slide is all about. Number one, scalability. To be able to put a system in day one, and that system at day one may be a few terabytes, but able to grow to hundreds of petabytes. That system's designed to be able to grow and be an upgrade all in a single capacity chassis. Next one is security. Security is critical. So that's why we use government-grade security to be able to protect our disk, no failures, to protect the nodes, also to protect for container for breaches. I like to tell my customers, and we can go on, there's a whole other conversation about security and how we protect it, but really and truly it comes down to, I tell my customers, and this is absolutely true, you have a better chance of an asteroid hitting your data center from your data getting corrupted, the way that we protect and encrypt our data. Availability is huge because as as we talked about earlier, Krista mentioned it, I mentioned it earlier, about pulling that inactive data off of your tier 1 storage. Now by doing that, your customers say, well, they're worried. Hey, we're protecting it, 3, 4, nines, maybe even higher, maybe even 5 nines availability from that tier 1 storage. So they're worried about, hey, how's my data still being protected? So that's the availability part of it. We're going to be able to put this system in place day one. We're going to be able to upgrade it. We're going to do hardware upgrades, software upgrades. We're going to be able to move it if we need to move data centers. We can move that around, all non-disruptive to the user. And in just a moment, I'll go into a slide. We'll go just a little bit deeper and technically, and I'll tell you how we do that. So the next piece is manageability. With IBM Cloud Storage, we have one manager. And that one manager can manage a few terabytes, can manage exabytes. We'll have one manager. That one manager will allow you to manage your container sets, manage your vaults, manage everything about it. It'll also be able to tell you, do you have failures, do you have quarantines going on, do reports. You don't have to worry about, with IBM Cloud Storage, you don't have to worry about using RAIDs or replication or doing your backups. It's all inherent into the system. And lastly, efficiency. We have nodes today that will house up to 84 drives per 4U. That's incredible. But what that really says to the customer is, you know what, we're going to save you cost on power and cooling, floor space, and really show you a savings as far as putting a denser footprint in a smaller U. So on the next slide, I want to go through how we protect this data. So as you see here, it's information dispersal algorithm. We call it an IDA. Now I do want to warn you on this. We can really get deep and technical on this slide, but I'm going to keep it high level for the audience. So on the IDA, what we're doing here is data comes in, we're going to slice that data. You can see here in this example, we're slicing it 12 times. We can turn those knobs. I'm just using a 12 wide, what we call a 12 wide slice. We can turn those knobs to meet whatever criteria you want. We can meet with you and really hone in on what width you need. But in this example, we're using a 12 wide. We're going to take that data and we'll slice it up. We're going to encrypt that data. And this is that encryption security portion of it that I was talking about. We're going to encrypt the data. Each one of those slices is going to be encrypted. And now what's interesting is we're going to take all 12 of those slices and we'll disperse those to 3 different sites, so 3 of your sites. Now you say, Lyndon, I have 2 sites, or Lyndon, I only have 1 site, or I have 4 sites. Well, we'll get into that later on deployment options. But here's what we're going to do. We're going to take all 12 slices, and each one of those nodes is going to receive a slice. As you can see here, site 1 gets 1 through 4, 2, all the way to 8, and then number 3 gets 12. That's just an example of how we disperse that data, and that's how we protect it. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of your systems are being protected with RAID and all the other snapshots, and usually they get about upwards of 5 nines, which is pretty good for 10, 20-year-old technology. Pretty good. This, I will tell you, we're getting upwards of 10, and again, how I turn the knobs, 10, 15 nines high availability. I can architect this system in a way where we can have a complete site outage, and you can still rewrite your data. And oh, by the way, I can also architect this in a way you can have a 2-site outage and still be able to rewrite your data. We can talk about that later in another conversation and get deep and technical on it. But this kind of goes to a high level of how we're protecting your data. Next slide, please. So let's talk about the architecture. As it says at the top, software defined, hardware aware. What does that mean? Well, basically what that means is it's software. It's software running on commodity hardware. Why is it important for commodity hardware? It's because as you see at the bottom, there's a list of several vendors that we've certified. It gives you options. That's really what it is all about, not giving you options on the commodity hardware that you can use. So we start with the bottom. We call them slice stores. Slice stores is where that dense disk that I mentioned I told you about earlier. You know what, that 84 drive node, that's the slice store. It holds the disk. It's a server. It's not just a server. It has software that runs on that server that does some fantastic things, and I won't go into a lot of detail about it. We can go into it later, but it does things like proactively monitoring disks, rebuilding disks, and as you build upon those slice stores, it builds upon the rebuilding times. Unlike RAID, where if you have a failure in RAID, a RAID 5, RAID 6, when you have a failure, you're probably going to take a hit in performance. With slice stores, it's consistent performance because we're constantly monitoring it. The next one is accessor. You know what? Accessor is where the magic happens. Accessors, when the data is ingested, it starts slicing the data. As I mentioned earlier about that IDA, that information dispersal algorithm, that's where the magic happens on that. The accessor, it slices the data, it then disperses that data to the nodes. As it says here, it sends and retrieves data. So as I'm sending data or I'm pulling data. But the accessors are also interested in one point. They're stateless. What does that mean? Stateless basically means they can come and go. Accessor fails, I can put another one in, it's non-disruptive, or I can build upon performance. I can take that and I can start stacking those accessors and really start building on the performance of it. Now, I'm not saying that this is going to be your tier 1 performance, but we can start building on bandwidth and throughput with that. And lastly, the third component of that is the manager. I mentioned the manager earlier in the few slides. The manager, unfortunately, it has the job of orchestrating the entire system. But you know what? It's not like you're managing your NAS environment. It's very simple, very easy to use GUI that you log into, and you can pull a lot of statistics. Manage, like I said, you can manage exabytes of data, you can pull reports, manage the entire system. Next slide. So as I promised you guys I would talk about deployment options. Well, here are your deployment options. You have a single site deployment. You can deploy this entire system in a single site and still reap all the benefits, all the protection and features that we have in a single site. You can do a 2-site. But the most I would say the most popular is probably the 3-site deployment, three or more. Here's why. It's because as you get up to additional sites, you'll be able to take advantage of site outages. Obviously, if you're in one site and that entire site goes down, you're going to lose it. I'm not saying you're going to be able to recover from that, but you get up to a 3-site, you start getting the benefits of having multiple sites in case of outages. You know what? If you like that, you say, Lyndon, you know what? I'm on a 2-site or I'm on a 1-site. You say, I really like the 3-site. We can do a hybrid approach. We can say, great, not a problem. We can do your 1 or 2 sites, and the other site can be in IBM Cloud Storage in the cloud, Bluemix. So those are your deployment options. I think we give you a lot of flexibility on how you want to deploy this. So the next slide, we're going to talk about how really a 3-time world champion in the IDC industry, in the Gartner industry. Well, as I look at this slide, one of the things that I think about the most, we're number 1 in all 3 categories, IBM Cloud Storage. But the thing is that what it says to me is we've already fixed a lot of those bumps and bruises that we had to go through to be able to get there. We fixed those bumps and bruises. Now we can focus on, and we have been focusing on listening to our clients and listening to what they need in a cloud object storage and be able to put those features in there. And we continue doing that, and we continue innovating. That's my last slide. I want to end by saying thank you. I appreciate your time. And if there's anything that I can do, please let me know. My email address is at the front of the page. I appreciate your time, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Lyndon. Before we end, I just wanted to give you an example of a customer who's actually using IBM Cloud Object Storage and Komprise. As Lyndon mentioned, we have multiple environments where we've worked together with IBM and Komprise. One of them is a large financial services institution. What we find a great fit for our solution with any industry that has a lot of data. So whether it's financial services or genomics and healthcare, government, education, universities, oil and gas, etc., all these industries are really good fits. In this example, we just wanted to walk you through a case study. This is a large insurance company, and they had 2 problems with their data. So first, they had petabytes of data across different sites, and in their case, they actually had 73,000 shares in which the data was kept. And so they really did not have visibility into what they had. Even though they had run some storage analytics tools from time to time, they really didn't know how much of their data was actually being used, how much was not being used. Being a mature industry, a lot of financial services companies have had turnover in their employees. And one of the problems they have is there's a lot of data that has been created by employees that are not even working for the company anymore. Something that this customer called zombie data. And one of the questions is, how much zombie data do we have, and because nobody knows what that data is, it's still being managed on tier 1 storage because nobody wants to touch it because they don't really know what's in it. So they had cold data, they had zombie data, and the customer told us it was as if they were kind of living in the dark. They knew there was a lot of inactive data around them, but they really didn't know how bad the problem was or how much they could save until they brought our solution in. The reason they looked at Komprise and IBM is because they had a corporate mandate to cut costs and to look at modern technologies like object storage and cloud. And this is not uncommon. Most companies today have CIO-level initiatives to look at ways to streamline costs and improve their agility. So we went in and using Komprise and its analysis, we showed them that their zombie data belonging to users no longer in the company, alone was costing them $7 million year over year. And just moving that data to IBM Costs was a $7 million savings. In addition to that, we also found that 60% of their data hadn't been touched in over a year and could also be moved to IBM Costs. So using these two together, the customers saw that they could save significant amount of costs by moving to IBM Costs and Komprise. And it was not just about cost savings, because once they moved the data to IBM Costs, the way Komprise moves the data, all the data is directly accessible from IBM Costs itself. So not only were they able to cut near-term costs, but they also had a better path to the future, because now they could directly manipulate the data on IBM Costs without having to go back to a NAS environment all the time. So these were the benefits that the customers saw, and this is pretty similar to what we see across different customers and industries. So what we want to end with is, if you are interested and if you like what you saw, and if you would like to understand how IBM and Komprise can benefit you in your own environment, we are offering a complimentary storage assessment with IBM. So contact your IBM rep, and we will work with them to actually enable Komprise on a subset of your data, so that you can see for yourself what the cost savings look like in your own environment with your own data. You'll get a sense of how much cold data you have, and is the solution useful to you, and how much could it save you. With that, maybe we'll just, Monica, do you want to check if there's any Q&A?
Yes, let me look, see if there's any questions. As Krishna mentioned, if you guys have any questions, please put them in the questions section, and we'll get to them. Okay, so we do see one question here. Okay, can this run on standard commodity hardware?
Yeah, I think Lyndon, I'll answer for the Komprise piece, and Lyndon actually touched on it for IBM Costs in an earlier slide. Yes, Komprise just runs as software. It just runs as a virtual machine. So any hypervisor environment you have, if you have VMware or Hyper-V or a KVM environment, you literally just bring up Komprise in that environment. There's no dedicated infrastructure required. And IBM Costs, Lyndon, do you want to answer that on the cost side?
Sure. Yeah, and we have an entire slide on that, and if we need to, I have a whole spec sheet of commodity hardware that we certified to run on. So we just can take their name down, and I can send them that list. But absolutely, there's multiple options that they can use to run IBM Cloud Storage on.
Okay, thank you. So you guys mentioned cost. There's a couple of questions that came in on that. So the first one is, what is the minimum and maximum capacity limits for cost?
That's a great question. So I will start off by saying the minimum, we've minimally have a system, we can minimally configure a system around 70 terabytes. And we have multiple deployments of hundreds of petabytes, and actually even we have multiple customers with exabytes. Our development team is also looking at what it means to be a zettabyte. So even to go further than that. So yes, I would say our minimum is around 70, and the limit is exabytes, and we're looking at what a zettabyte is.
Yeah, and Komprise is the same way. You can start, you can start with, even 50 terabytes or so. And just add more virtual machines on demand. It's a scale-out architecture, and most of our customers are multiple petabytes, and some are approaching hundreds of petabytes, and the solution just scales seamlessly.
Okay, thank you. So the question on cost is, what happens when I have billions of files? How do Komprise and IBM Costs scale?
Yeah. So Komprise uses a purely scale-out architecture. So essentially, one of the ways in which Komprise scales is it does not have any central bottlenecks. The Komprise virtual machines work together as a distributed, and Komprise does not put a central SQL database or an in-memory database or anything that can create bottlenecks. And because of that, because it's a multi-threaded and scale-out architecture, Komprise scales linearly, so it routinely handles billions of files because it's not billions of files going to a single choke point. It's billions of files spread across different virtual machines. So each virtual machine is, has a subset of that work. And because it's pretty lightweight, a single VM can handle actually billions of files even on its own, but it parallelizes out. That's how it gets performance. And the other thing I should point out is Komprise runs non-intrusively, meaning that it actually runs in the background. It never interferes with active work on your storage or your network. It actually slows itself down as needed so that it's invisible to performance on your primary storage and your network environment. Lyndon, do you want to talk about the COS architecture and the accessors and how it can scale?
Yeah, so I touched on this a bit. So that's what's great about object storage is the ability to scale with it versus a NAS environment. One of the things with IBM Cloud Object Storage is the ability to just add in additional accessors for better performance. And with the billions of files, that comes in. Those files come in. They get encrypted, sliced, and then distributed across the slice stores. And those slice stores, you can scale those in a way that will build upon that capacity. Meaning, if I'm running, a couple petabytes and I need to scale with more additional files with Komprise, I'll just simply add additional nodes to that. Very easy with IBM Cloud Object Storage to scale the environment.
Okay, thank you. So I'm scrolling here. We have several questions that came in. So the next question is actually two-part. Can data movement from on-premise to cloud be throttled? And the second part is there any way to manage the bandwidth?
So, Krishna, do you want me? I'll take this one. So basically, if we're talking about throttling bandwidth and throttling the cloud, I would say that if you look at the cloud environment and putting data in the cloud, you start to have to think about what that network looks like versus if you have something on-prem environment in your own data center. You don't really need to worry about throttling back and forth to the cloud. In your own data center, you would use your own network for any of that throttling capabilities that you would want to use. If you're looking at something like the cloud, then you need to start looking at the cost. There's some cost to that, as far as if I need to pull that data back, how much is that going to cost? And so that's where you would start looking at the cloud provider as far as helping throttle that.
Okay, great, thanks. So the next question is, can we manage encryption at the target without encrypting data at the source? So I'm not sure if that's for you, Lyndon, or if that's, Krishna, something that you can answer.
So I don't mind taking this one. You know what? As I mentioned, our encryption, talked about in our encryption technology, how it's government. It's very, like I said, I tell customers you have a better chance of hitting, after we're hitting the data center than someone accessing it. Anyhow, what it really comes down to, if they're wanting to manage their encryption on site at the target side, that's no problem. We can simply just uncheck. It's just a quick tick box that you uncheck from the object side, and if they want to manage that and let it encrypt, absolutely not a problem for cloud object storage.
Yeah, and with Komprise, you can actually choose to use the cloud object storage encryption, or if you need to encrypt data at source before you transmit it, Komprise provides you a way to also encrypt using customer-provided keys. And most customers choose to encrypt data at rest unless they're in a regulated environment where they have to encrypt data before it's transmitted. So we support both.
Okay, great, thanks. So Krishna, I think that this might be a question for you. How does Komprise address file retriever if a file is archived but the stub is removed, perhaps by accident?
Sure, it's a great question. So again, because Komprise doesn't use stub files, essentially the link that Komprise puts in does not have the context of where the data is. So the context of the actual data is kept in IBM Costs. And the reason for that is that this provides you a resilient approach. So for example, let's say a user goes in and deletes one of the links that we put in on the source. Maybe they deleted a directory by accident. And they come back to IT and they want to restore that directory. Through Komprise, you can actually bring back all the links because the context of the link itself is not kept in the link. It's actually kept in the target. And this provides a resilient approach where there is no single point of failure on any of that data. The data is fully accessible.
Okay. So I think we have one more question that came in. The question is, can this solution be used to analyze production file shares in a POC?
Yes, customers routinely do that. They actually point, when we do the assessment, they actually point it at real data on their actual production shares. Because Komprise is adaptive, because it actually throttles itself back, we run under about 3.5% of the load on your file system. So users and applications don't even know that it's there. So you can absolutely point it even in a POC on production shares.
Okay, thanks. So I think that's the last of our questions. I don't see any more questions coming in. So I think what we'll do is conclude the webinar. So this concludes our webinar. Again, I want to say thank you for joining and enjoy the rest of your day.
Great. Thank you, Lyndon. Thank you all.